I appreciate everybody being here and having me for this talk and listening to the kind of work we do. Like Patty said, I am an exercise physiologist, so most of the work I do deals with physiology, but I'm getting to this whole aspect of changing behavior using technology and those kind of things as well, so that we can actually get people to adopt and sustain these behavior changes that are necessary to improve health. So I started this line of work looking at the effect of sedentary behavior and on the health of office workers primarily, because most people sit during the course of the day. That's what we do, right? As students, as faculty, what do? We're sitting most of the day. That's the way life has become for us. So, our mode of subsistence and occupation has changed over the course of time. So just to give a brief background, humans were very active in the beginning. We were hunter-gatherers, and we transitioned from being hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists to about the 1800s, where we became more modernized and urbanized, where, the nature of our jobs changed and we started sitting more often. As hunter-gatherers, we would be active for about 12 to 14 hours per day. That's how active the Bushmen are these days, because they travel great distances to be active, to put food on the table. And nowadays, all we do is sit in the desk, sit in front of the computer, we get a paycheck, go to the supermarket. That's the hunting I do. I go to the supermarket with my cart. So I don't get a lot of physical activity as well. So just out of curiosity, how many people exercise about or are active for about 5 days a week, 30 minutes per day? Show of hands. So that's really impressive. We have a good majority here. That's not the case usually with the regular folk, the regular population, and that's the recommended guidelines. And we are sitting most of the time. So there's been a disruption in the obligatory activity that's required for food acquisition. We're all sitting nowadays. So there's a body of literature that's becoming very popular, and it's becoming prominent in the sense which suggests that sitting is really harmful for you, just the fact that you're sitting for too long. And this is independent of the amount of exercise you do. So, there are a lot of studies that look at relationship between, sitting time and heart disease and, glucose uptake, metabolic profile, those kind of things. So it's been suggested that sitting has probably become the smoking of our current generation. And it's highly associated with mortality rates as well. There are a lot of prospective studies that are looking into this. But the experimental evidence is still lacking, and that's what we are trying to do, trying to get, establish this causality between sitting and various health aspects. This is not a new concept, really. This has been around for a long time, since about the 1700s. Bernardo Ramzini, who was considered the father of occupational medicine, he actually said that sitting probably isn't good for you. He said that chair workers, they typically have their own particular diseases, their own unwholesome humorsome from their sedentary life from sitting for too long. So this is not a new concept particularly. Now, just to put things into perspective, I'm going to take the example of obesity. The obesity rates in the US are pretty high right now. 2 out of 3 Americans are either overweight or obese. And I picked this as an example because obesity tends to affect pretty much each and every part of the body. And this figure kind of explains that. From head to toe, it causes diseases from gout to idiopathic intracranial hypertension. So, it's cause of a whole host of issues. So to show the relationship between obesity and prolonged sitting, just some evidence here. People tend to sit more on work days than on leisure time days. Okay, and this is not just at work. So you sit for a long time at work, you go home, you probably are pretty tired and stressed out from a day, and you tend to sit more on work days as compared to leisure time days, where you probably are more active during the majority of the day and you don't sit as much. The obese typically tend to sit much more than lean individuals, and 50 to about 75% of Americans sit in front of a computer at work. And what's the effect of this on obesity? There's a pretty neat study that I thought I should tell you guys about. This is about a study done in Africa, and it was conducted in about 3 different populations who lived in the same habitat. Okay, so on the extreme right, there is the Bushman tribe, who are extremely active, and that's our comparison group. That's the most active group. And then you have pastoralists, who are from the Kavango tribe, and you have pastoralists who moved to the city and started engaging in seated occupations. And these people were within about a 100-mile radius of each other. And just by changing occupation, the effect on weight status was that pastoralists were about 16% heavier than the highly active Bushman tribe. And those pastoralists who moved to the city, they were about 27% heavier. So there's clear indication that how active you are at work typically tends to affect your weight status. This is another example done in an industrial male population in India. These are different workers in a jute mill in India in 1956. The study was done by Meyer et al. And you can see at the x-axis, you can see different categories of occupations over there. You have sedentary, ranging all the way to very heavy work. And you can see the pattern of weight status among these different occupations. You can see that the most sedentary occupations, individuals who engage in the most sedentary occupations had the highest weight status as compared to somebody who engaged in very heavy work like blacksmiths and cutters and high labor-intensive occupations. And it's just interesting to point out that the average weight for stall holders were about 170 pounds. That really isn't too bad as compared to the average weight of the American right now. So it's just gotten even more worse. So due to all this mounting evidence, it's this whole problem of sitting for too long at the workplace is starting to get a lot of attention. For example, the CDC has now stated that the workplace is a priority setting for health promotion. And the reason for that is because they consider the workplace as a natural social environment where people tend to interact with each other quite a bit, and it's an opportunity to modify behavior quite easily because humans are easily influenced by the behavior of a peer, for example. So, that's why CDC is pushing this quite a bit. And there's also some evidence that workplace health programs tend to increase work productivity, potentially reduces health insurance premiums and worker compensation claims and absenteeism. So, it tends to increase the productivity and of both the employee and eventually the employer as well. The National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health has, in fact, initiated the Total Worker Health Initiative, which integrates the work environment, the employer, and the employee to promote overall worker health. And under this program, one of their area of focus is prevention through design, and that's what I focus on. What I try to do is try to modify the workplace so that I can retrofit the work environment with equipment that can prevent illness. So the kind of work I do is I try to get people to be more active at the workplace by getting them to stand up more using treadmill workstations where you're engaging in some dynamic activity throughout the day, or just at least stand during the course of the day. Accumulate this over the 8-hour period that you're there at. There are several kinds of strategies adopted to try to get people more active. This is a picture from a company in Japan where gas workers are engaging in about 30 minutes of activity per day. So this is one strategy. In Japan, it's great. You have 30 minutes dedicated for your employees to be active. You can see even, so these are probably blue-collar workers, but there are pictures with, white-collar workers with suits and ties on the terrace, engaging in activity. So it's a very good practice, I would say. Conference walks is becoming more popular in the US as well. They have little tracks around the workplace where, you walk while you're having a meeting. So you walk and talk. So you're getting some activity, you're breaking that sitting time. And this is the kind of work I do. I try to get people to be more active while they are at work. Light intensity activity. So you can either engage in walking at a treadmill workstation when you can, or just breaking sitting by standing. So I've broken down my presentation to two aspects. One is looking at a couple of studies that I did, looking at dynamic movement workstations and then at static postural change workstations, which is sit to stand. So I'll start off with a couple of studies which I did with dynamic movement workstations. There are a couple of examples of what people typically do. So you can either have a treadmill workstation like this person is using over here, and you can walk at slow speeds, about 1 to 2 miles per hour, while you're doing some phone calls or just doing some word processing or something like that. Or people even put little bikes under the table where you can pedal while you are sitting. And these are some of the devices that's available. This is a more modern, more expensive mode of using a bike under a workstation. Well, that is a simpler model. Some people have gone even further and built a hamster wheel. into the workstation. Not sure about the practicality of this, but people are using it. It's probably got some aesthetic appeal, I would say. Right? It looks pretty cool, doesn't it? So this concept has been around for a while. It's not really new. It's just catching a lot of steam right now. The earliest work that I found was done by Nathan Edelson in 1983. And he was an ergonomist by profession. And the reason why he started doing this was because he felt that just from sitting for too long, people were engaged in one posture for long, and it's resulting in more stress levels, and work productivity is probably going down. So he built the workstation to eliminate postural fixity, sitting for too long for prolonged bouts. And he found that it increases arousal levels, it reduces stress, and it does not affect word processing speed. And now it's been more accepted as a weight loss solution as well by James Levine. He is the one who brought this concept into the limelight about 2005. This is a picture of what Nathan Edelson built back in 1983. Looks great. It's a cubicle. It's got a treadmill. There's a person sitting and working on the on the computer. The only one flaw to this design here is that you can see the chair is on the treadmill belt. You don't want to start the treadmill by accident. It wouldn't be good. So one of the first questions that came to my mind when I was introduced to this topic by my advisor when I was doing my PhD, who heard about this concept, and he said, "Hey, Dinesh, what do you think about this treadmill workstation?" And I was scratching my head there. I'm like, really? It's the first time I heard about this. And really, how do you work while you're doing this? So, what about, can you focus on, on your work productivity? It doesn't affect cognitive function, those kind of things. I said, good. You have a study to do. You're going to do it. So I tanked my big mouth, and I said, okay, I'll do this. And I did a study looking at using a treadmill workstation, the performance of simulated office tasks. So what we did for this was we brainstormed some kind of activities that we thought people would engage in while they are doing work. So we thought of some, people use their brain, cognitive function, word processing, reading comprehension, math, those kind of things, typing speed, using the mouse, those kind of things. So these are some findings from that study. So what we did is we had people come in and randomly pick one of the two activities to perform first, either in a sitting condition or in a standing condition. So they performed all the activities, and what we found, since this is acute, we saw that typing performance decreases a little bit by about 5% while you're using the treadmill workstation as compared to sitting. There was no difference in selective attention and processing speed. We used a Stroop word color task for that. There were no significant differences in the score for that. Using the mouse, we're examining fine motor control movements by looking at this test. We saw that there was a significant but small decrement in clicking speed and dragging and dropping tasks using the mouse while the person is using the treadmill workstation as compared to sitting. Pardon me.
What speed were they walking at?
This was about 1 mile per hour. 1 mile per hour. So it's really slow walking. So that's what we focus while we're using treadmill workstations. You want a speed of about 0.7 to maybe 2 miles per hour. That's the speed that I found, which is, the speed that you can actually do activity. You don't want to be running while you're doing this. Yes.
So we have a couple of these downstairs.
Yep.
In our workspace, and I try using them, and for some activities it works great, for some others it doesn't really, depending on what you're doing. But I noticed that when you walk super slowly, it takes a lot more effort. You're doing it very consciously. It's not as unconscious as walking, and it kind of takes away from whatever task you're doing.
Yep.
But if you speed up, then you're walking too fast to be able to type and be able to even read what you're doing because your body's constantly bouncing. Is that something that people just learn and get adjusted to over time? Or
Yes. So how long have you been using it? Do you use it very often?
About once a day.
Okay.
Maybe in the afternoon.
Yeah. So typically what we want people to do is use this over several times during the day, over the course of the week, as well for a long time. So this, again, was an acute condition, and I don't have any longitudinal data for this, but just subjective, qualitative data. When you talk to people, people actually pick times of the day when they may be checking emails, when it's more feasible. And the speeds that you walk at, slow speeds are a problem. It can be annoying because it's really slow. And there is this fine line, which very, very get into, which is really comfortable. It's about 1.5 miles per hour, I would say. And that's where people get used to it, and then they get accustomed to this particular speed and say, okay, this is perfect for me. Now, I had in my study people who walked from 0.7 miles to 2.5 miles per hour. It's what they do and what they're comfortable with. So it's up to the user to find and pick the speed they're comfortable at.
So there's definitely a speed where walking becomes sort of mindless, and then
Yes. And that's one of the advantages of the treadmill, too. It's got a motor, so it keeps going. So, humans are made to walk. So a kind of a speed, you just keep going, and then you have your hands as a reference on the treadmill, on your desk, and then you just get lost in the work. It becomes second nature once you get used to it.
I guess I just haven't found my speed then yet.
Potentially. It's a matter of getting used to it. Go ahead.
So this is fascinating. There's, I guess, then there's a small hit on the fine motor
Yes.
clicking and drag drop stuff. What tasks do you find are really improved by moving? Like, what are some of the things that maybe we speed up? Like, I thought the previous one where we sped up a little bit was
I
interesting.
haven't
the typing
done
speed.
any studies to look at that, but that's a good question. What kind of tasks would help? The way we look at it is what kind of tasks really wouldn't be deteriorated. But what we're doing with the study we are looking at right now is looking at productivity in terms of so for example, we're doing a study with Mass General Hospital, which is funded by NIH. We're looking at various aspects, and one of the things we're looking at is productivity. We're looking at grant submissions and whether that improves the Research Administration Finance Office, looking at productivity. We have some other metrics as well. So again, this is a pretty new field of investigation. So there's just evidence building up, but that's a pretty good question. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just wondering that in terms of, because you mentioned that it changes arousal,
Yes.
how it would affect collaboration between people in terms of, does it actually improve the collaboration? Because I would suspect when people are tired, they're more susceptible to be anxious, stressed, and therefore decrease the quality of collaboration versus when you're in a work environment and you're aroused, where you're therefore more active listener.
Mm-hmm.
And one example of that is usually subordinates know what's a good time to interrupt the boss.
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest with you. It's a good question again. Again, it's something that could be investigated, but I think it's difficult to measure these. You need really sensitive measures to see whether you can detect arousal and see if it improves collaboration as well. So again, maybe productivity would be a way to look at it, to see if this collaboration really results in improvement in some end goal, like better processing of grant submissions, like what I'm looking at, and it probably could be an aspect that we could look into. Yeah. Okay. Does that kind of answer your question, or allude to it at least? All right. So again, with cognitive tasks, again, in an acute condition, we saw there was a slight decrement in performance. And in all these tasks, it ranged about 5 to about 11% decrement while you're walking at work as compared to simply sitting. And but qualitatively, when we ask people, they say, no, we feel great. It's just a matter of getting used to it. And is this slight decrement, is that something we can compromise to improve health? That's the other question. Now, after looking at this, we saw potential in exploring this further. So the big question was, really, does it improve health? So we needed a longitudinal study to look at that. So when we started doing this, there really weren't any recommendation how we should be using treadmill workstation, how much should people walk during the day, at what speed they should be doing this. There was nothing. So it was a pilot study, and all we did was, just put these desks in the office, about 12 office workers, to see how they would accept this and how they would use it. So we just wanted to see if it would help reduce their sitting time, and to see if it favorably influenced health markers like weight and body composition, and blood biomarkers like glucose, insulin, and cholesterol, etc., in overweight and obese office workers. So when we started doing this study, there was just one manufacturer of treadmill workstations. It was Steelcase and cost about $4,000. Being a poor graduate student, I didn't have the money for that. So we went around building these by hand. And this is what we came up with. We got a commercial treadmill. We cut off the supports. We put the console in a little tray under the table, and we had a sit-to-stand desk. And this is what we came up with. I joked with my advisor that I need a minor in carpentry as well, but he disagreed. So our participants, we had 12 University of Tennessee faculty and staff. We had several inclusion criteria, but primarily they had to be able to walk continually for about 60 minutes. And they had to be overweight or obese. So they had to have a body mass index of about 28 kg per meter square or more. The study was for 9 months. We had a pre-post design. We measured outcome variables on 3 different occasions: at baseline, 3 months, and then at the end of the study. And we gave them no recommendation on the daily use of workstations. We put it in their offices and told them, use it the way you want to do it. So primary outcome variable was how much they used it. So change in sedentary time and activity. So we used a device called the ActivePal, which is a commercially available sensor. It's very simple. It's worn on the thigh, on the midline of the thigh, and it looks at changes in inclination. So it gives you a pretty good estimate of how much time you spend sitting, standing, or walking. And gives you steps per day as well. And this is the output that the device gives us, and we use this as a motivational tool to get people to be more active. So we could show them, okay, these are the times or the periods of the day, when you're sitting, standing, so you can see people actually stood quite a bit over here. Usually when we look at this in normal office worker, you can see a lot of yellow, which is sitting and lying. We measured weight, waist and hip circumference. We measured body composition. We wanted to see how that would affect, person fat changes, not just weight. How much did people gain lean mass? And we are really interested in seeing if there was a change in truncal fat mass, which is really the bad kind of fat, which causes increases in cholesterol and poor glucose control in the body. And we also measure resting heart rate and blood pressure. We did some blood work. We analyzed blood at 3 occasions, and looked to see if there were any changes in their lipid profile, cholesterol, basically, and the metabolic profile, insulin, plasma glucose, glycosylated hemoglobin. And since diet is a pretty critical component that affects these factors, we measured diet using the gold standard that's available, which is a dietary recall. It's a 3-day, 24-hour recall to see the breakdown of the nutrient intake in our participants. And this is a snapshot of our characteristics of the participants. You can see they were pretty heavy set. They had a BMI of at least 33. It's pretty big people, I would say. So simply putting treadmill workstations in the offices of these participants, people are able to reduce their sitting and lying time significantly by about 90 minutes. So these are median values over the course of the 3 time points. So they're sitting, standing, and stepping. So people reduced sitting time by about 90 minutes per day. And this translated to about 50 minutes of standing during the course of the day between baseline and end of the study, and increased stepping time by about 40 minutes. And this sort of translated to a decrease in about 2.5 kgs of weight loss in our participants on average. It ranged. Some people didn't lose weight. There was one participant who used it for about 5 hours per day, and he lost about 26 pounds by the end of the study. So about 2.5 on average, and significant changes in waist and hip circumference. That, again, is related to your dangerous kind of fat. So about 5 centimeter decrease between a baseline and end of the study for waist and hip circumference, which is really encouraging. There were no significant changes in person body fat, but there were trends towards significance. Again, we had a small sample size here to keep that in mind. So about 2% decrease in person body fat. And again, truncal fat, just to point out over here, about 1.3 kg decrease. So that's something we were really interested in, which is why I keep pointing that out. This is just a table containing all other variables that we measured. Just want to point out the blood biomarkers that we had. So between baseline and end of the study, participants significantly improved their cholesterol levels and improved their long-term glucose control in the body, which is indicated by glycosylated hemoglobin. So clearly there were benefits to using a treadmill workstation. So the overarching conclusion that we made is that even though we didn't give participants any recommendations, people were open to using something like this. Simply providing them with a treadmill workstation or an avenue to break sitting time, people were willing to do that. And probably the reason why is, I feel, is that it's light intensity activity as compared to any other workplace intervention where you have a wellness program where you have people go to the gym and exercise in moderate to vigorous intensity activity. Here you don't have to bring a change of work clothes. You're doing this while you're working. You don't break a sweat. People are a little averse to more intense activity, I would say. So this probably is a more attractive kind of an option, which may be more, people may be more receptive or adherent even to something like this. We were very happy to see that there was a positive effect on visceral fat, as indicated by a decrease in waist circumference. And this was directly related to a decrease, I believe, in total cholesterol classification and improvements in total glycemic control in the body. We did not see significant weight loss decreases in our participants, but there were trends towards significance. So about 6 participants lost 5% or more of their fat weight, which was encouraging. And typically, the weight loss that we saw in our studies is what's seen in any kind of physical activity weight loss intervention. Any moderate to vigorous 30-minute per day intervention, this is what you see, about 2 kgs or 2.5 kgs by the end of the study. So there were similar weight loss trends, regardless of the intensity of activity that we had people engage in. And we estimated the approximate energy expenditure of using the treadmill workstation to be about 159 calories per day, as compared to simply sitting and working. And it is said that, this weight gain that's happening in Americans, every year you tend to gain a little bit of weight, about 1 to 2 kgs. You can offset that by increasing your energy expenditure by about 100 kcals per day. So, it kind of fits into, people's daily lives. If you have an avenue where people can be more active during the course of the day, if you can expend about 150 kcals, you can at least arrest that weight gain that people experience. So I'll switch gears into the others. Go ahead.
On the figures you had on the blood biomarkers, I think, it looks like at 3 months, if I read that right, the hemoglobin went up.
Yes.
And same with the LDL. Do you have any thoughts on why that might have happened rather, instead of the 9 month where it went down?
I do.
Okay.
So the timing was that when we made the measurements, it was in January, which is right after the holidays. Okay. So Thanksgiving, Christmas, and it was just bad timing. So I can attribute it to that, I would say. That's a good catch, though. People don't usually notice that. So this is a relatively more simple approach, which is getting a lot of press and a lot of popularity. Every other week, there's a new article on sit-to-stand workstations, either in the Boston Globe or some other newspaper. The one on the extreme right over there is a more simpler setup. It's a simple sit-to-stand workstation. Touch of a button, you push it up. You can transition between sitting and working to standing and working. This one here is a more expensive but pretty cool, I would say, setup desk, because it's more technologically advanced, and it detects how much you're sitting and standing. And if you're standing too much, it tells you to sit down. So it automatically decreases the height as well. So it's kind of a smart desk, I would say. It may be a little annoying, though, if you're in the middle of something, then all of a sudden the desk goes down. It's probably not a good thing. Maybe it should beep or something. I don't know if it does that. But it's a pretty good, interesting phenomenon that we are working on, as well. And we need to be able to know when people are standing too much as well. So this is a study I did while I was at Northeastern about a year and a half ago. And the objective was to replicate the same study we did previously and look at the same biomarkers and outcome variables to see if there would be any changes by using just a sit-to-stand workstation as compared to something more dynamic like a treadmill workstation. So we had an 8-month period again. Again, this was a pilot study because this was based off seed funding from the Harvard School of Public Health, which is a small sum of money that we got to do this study. So we had about 10 overweight individuals in the study over an 8-month period. And we wanted to see if reducing sitting and increasing standing time at work changes sedentary behavior, and any changes, if there are any changes in the outcome variables that we examined previously. So again, there were several inclusion criteria. We primarily wanted everybody to be either overweight or obese. They had to be capable of accumulating at least 3 hours of standing per day, and did not engaging in any other physical activity. That's normal for a lot of people, though. And we had 2 sites, and in this study we tried to get clusters of people so that we could see if interacting with each other increased their the time spent standing. And we had people from the Office of Research Administration, Finance, and Student Financial Services. And since IRB is housed at the Office of Research Administration and Finance, we made sure all our T's were dashed and I's were dotted for this study. Again, we measured outcome variables at baseline, 3 and 8 months. We again used the active PAL monitor to determine how much time was spent during the course of the day sitting at work and standing. Now, the outcome variables are similar to the previous study, but what we did was we added a very sensitive hemodynamic measurement to this particular study. And one of the reasons why we did this was there is really no energy expenditure when you're standing as compared to a treadmill workstation while you're walking. So we were not sure if we would see any weight loss, or change in cardiometabolic markers. So we wanted to look at other indicators of health. So hemodynamics is pretty sensitive and there's rapid changes. So we looked at vascular measures like intima media thickness, or the thickness of the arterial wall, because that's associated with atherosclerosis. And we looked at the rate of blood flow within the arteries. So that gives an indication of arterial compliance. So you want your arteries to be compliant when you're doing these activities. So you want a slower blood flow as compared to a faster one. And we also measured musculoskeletal discomfort, affect, and stress levels for this. So we got a donation of about 10 desks from a company called Ergonomic, and they're called the WorkFit height adjustable desks. It's a pretty simple concept. At the touch of a button, they have a patented technology. You push this button here, and the desk rises up, and you can adjust it to a comfortable standing work height. And in this study, we gave them a recommendation, and this was based off our previous treadmill workstation studies. So we saw that in the previous study I did, people would use the workstation for about 2.5 hours. So we thought, okay, 3 hours probably sounds like a good amount of time where people can accumulate standing. So that was the recommendation we gave. And to promote behavior change, the device that we used, it had this neat function where you could set it to give vibrotactile cues when people are sitting for too long. So we set it for about 20 minutes to give real-time cues so that people could break their sitting and just stand up while they're sitting for too long at work. Again, these are our participant characteristics. Again, pretty heavy-set people, a BMI of about 30 kg per meter square. Outcome variables, people significantly increased their standing time at work as compared to baseline. So we achieved our goal at about 3 months. People exceeded the 3-year recommendation, decreased a little below by the end of the study at 8 months. That typically tends to happen. You have this novelty phase when you get it, boom, use goes up, and then it settles down to a more, normal kind of behavior. But again, they were significantly higher than baseline. These are our outcome variables. I've just broken down into anthropometrics, blood biomarkers, and hemodynamic measures. Again, no change whatsoever in anthropometrics like weight, waist to hip circumference, those kind of things. Again, it's probably because you need a more something of higher intensity as compared to just standing to impact these markers of health, the changes. Again, no change in most of the blood biomarkers, but worryingly enough, there was an increase in insulin, and I'm not really sure why that happened. Really, it shouldn't happen, because there is some sort of muscle contraction anyways while you're standing. It's more static than dynamic movement, but even so, there is some activity going on in the muscles, and that's crucial for insulin uptake. This is something that we still need to investigate, so it's a new research question, I would say. No change in hemodynamic measures either for most measures. So we looked at the blood flow and intermediate thickness at the carotid artery, which gave us a systemic measure, and then we looked at a local measure, which is the popliteal artery at the knee, because that's going to be affected by standing quite a bit. No changes in most of those variables. We saw change in one of the markers, one of the localized measures, which is blood flow velocity at the popliteal artery, and this is just a snapshot of what we look at. That's an image of the popliteal artery from the ultrasound, and we look at peak systolic velocity. So we are looking at blood flow velocity at the systolic phase of the cardiac cycle. So that's when there's, blood is just pumped out from your heart. And we actually saw an increase in blood flow velocity. Peak systolic velocity of the popliteal artery increased both at 3 months and 8 months, which wasn't a favorable thing to see. We didn't want to see this. So overarching findings, again, just by looking at how much people changed behavior, giving them this option, they can modify their behavior. Again, this is light intensity activity. People may enjoy doing this. We need more evidence on all the aspects we've measured. There's very little experimental evidence that's out there. No changes in cardiometabolic variables has been observed by some other short-term studies as well that looked at changes in about 4 months of use. There is no conclusive evidence whether this improves musculoskeletal discomfort or no. We didn't see any significant changes in musculoskeletal discomfort while using sit-to-stand workstations. Some studies have reported that and seen improvement as well. And this unfavorable change that we saw in localized decrease in arterial compliance, it's possible, as we showed. And this probably is related to how you stand rather than the total duration of standing. So maybe prolonged bouts of standing probably is not the way to go. It's about breaking it periodically. So we don't know what's the right duration to do. So I use a sit-to-stand workstation as well. So what happens is when I stand up, I just stand and I forget about that completely till I start to feel fatigued. So that's probably about 45 minutes or an hour, and then I gotta sit, and then I sit. So you probably need something that reminds you to break sitting and standing and having a right balance of doing this over the course of the day. So we need to investigate more the effect of standing bouts and duration and frequency.
But so are there any studies available at all then right now that demonstrate that there might be a benefit to standing? Because it seems that this is actually a fairly negative result. And related to that, I remember my mother saying that from doing a lot of standing, she got varicose veins, which are very painful and had to be removed. I don't know whether that's a folktale or whether, but there might even be negatives.
It's a good question, and that's what I was seeing from this particular measure as well, which is one of the reasons why we use a sensitive measure. There isn't a lot of evidence, no. Most of the studies, experimental studies that have looked at this have looked at blood biomarkers, and those variables take a long time to change, either positively or negatively. So we don't know. There are some prospective studies. I found 1 or 2 studies that looked at change in people who stood at the checkout counters at grocery stores. Over the course of 3 years, there was an increase in the thickness in the blood vessel. So maybe hemodynamics, there is a negative effect. Again, I can't say it that conclusively, but it needs to be investigated. So again, I come back to the point, it's probably about how you stand rather than how long you are standing. Karthik.
Do you think another covariate can also be if people get the impression that they've been standing all day, it impacts the kind of food they intake? It's a little bit like going swimming every day and coming back and eating a larger meal because you feel like you deserved that meal. Could that possibly explain why some of these markers didn't change?
So if they were eating more, I would say those markers would have changed negatively, right? If there was a greater consumption of energy. So, but that typically tends to happen, I would say, when people are engaging in exercise. There's a more compensatory effect. What happens is when you work out for about 30 minutes a day, people tend to be more sedentary. And, so it kind of offsets the benefit of activity. So that may have an effect on diet as well. So for example, this happens to me too. I run quite a bit, about 30 miles a week, and when I run quite a bit, I tend to, say, okay, I've done this today, so I'm going to eat a little more. Even somebody who knows this does that, so it's possible. But I don't know if it really applies to standing, because that's a really light intensity activity. It's possible people may sit more at the end of the day because they may be more fatigued. Again, that's something we are examining in a study we are doing right now to see if there's a compensatory effect. But I'm not sure about diet, though. Does somebody else have a question? Yeah.
So there was a study done in the 50s where they compared bus drivers versus bus conductors, right, who were standing, and then the drivers were sitting all the time, and they found that the conductors had a lot lower risk for heart disease.
Yep.
And the reason that they, at that point, hypothesized was because when you're sitting, the amount of lipoprotein in your blood goes down considerably, and that's what you need to break down fats. And if you have too much fat flowing around your blood, probability or whatever chances of getting heart disease goes up. But is that something that actually, that was one study, right?
Yes.
Is that something that's actually made that relationship, that's what happens? And other things that, like looking at insulin levels and things like that. What exactly is going on to the body physiologically when you're sitting down that is so different from when you're standing up?
Yep. So physiologically, what happens while sitting has been examined to a certain extent. You spoke about lipoproteins. So a lot of this work has been done in rats back in the mid-2000s, and they found that just being sedentary, in rats, it tends to suppress lipoprotein lipase, which is very, very critical to oxidize fats and those kind of things. So there's a certain amount of there's a fairly good body of evidence with sitting, but this hasn't been done with standing, and that's one of the things we want to look at now. That study you pointed out about sitting in the bus drivers, that's one of the, the basic studies that actually brought this whole field of study regarding physical activity and sedentary behavior to the fore. It was done by Jeremy Morris back in the 1950s. So one of the things in that study is when you think about conductors and bus drivers, it's not just the sitting of the drivers that's probably causing this, the difference between the two things. It's that the conductors are moving back and forth as well. It's not just the standing, they're engaging in activity as well. They're engaging in more energy expenditure doing that. Standing, on the other hand, probably doesn't expend as much energy. So, that probably is causing the difference in these two kinds of workstations.
We could also say the drivers have a more stressful job because they're now
Possible. Yes. Possible, yes. So there are different factors. It's not as easy as we try to show it. There are multiple variables that can affect these things. But physical activity and energy expenditure is a very strong marker and variable that impacts these outcome variables. So we can say with a certain amount of confidence that it tends to change these biomarkers.
So we could say if you're standing at your desk, the likelihood of you moving around is a lot higher than
Yes,
sitting down.
could be.
And that might be a
Could be.
factor that
Could be. Yes. So now the message is changing from not just stand more to move more, to break sitting, stand, and move more as well. That's another question.
I was just wondering, as a person that has been sitting down in front of the computer for many hours, and I see many other colleagues also that they are developing like back problems. And
Yes.
I guess that this is about the body posture.
Yep.
And I was wondering, I guess that when you stand, you have less likelihood of having a negative body posture. So I wonder if there is any study on that, or you think that might be a real thing or not?
Yes. So you're talking about back problems. I think that's more related to postural fixity. So sitting for too long, yes, it causes back problems, and then you need to break it. Probably can have the same issues with standing for too long as well. When I stand for too long, right now I've been standing for about 45 minutes already. I can feel that strain in my legs already. So again, there's more spinal loading while you're sitting at the back over here. That's why you need to keep breaking it. Whatever you're doing, is my opinion. whether you're sitting or you're standing. It's about transitioning regularly. And that's one place where this will really help, I would say. So if you're standing for 2 hours continuously, that will have its own issues as well. I'm pretty sure about it.
Actually, one more question.
Yes.
I read some work, very interesting work from Harvard, where they look at body posture and how it changes maybe your confidence and your physiological parameters. I wonder what are your impressions about that, and maybe just like standing up will increase your perceived confidence or productivity, which I think is an important factor also for mental well-being.
I have no clue. Could you please forward me that study if you get it? Body confidence, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, Amy Cuddy.
Okay. That's an interesting way to look at it. I never thought of it. I mean, I've been focused so much on the physiological aspect, but again, it's dynamic. There are so many things that can be affected, so it's a pretty interesting take, I would say. Thanks for bringing that to my notice. Appreciate it. All right, moving along. So there are a lot of research gaps, I would say, when we look at workstation-based interventions. Impact on health, we're just getting this body of evidence as to what happens, starting to learn more. We have no idea about the dose response. Like, what's good for you? How much treadmill walking should you do to see a better change? What's the threshold where you see? What's the threshold when you stand? How do you stand? What's the frequency of standing? What's about duration? There is no idea about, what's the difference between prolonged bouts versus accumulating during the course of the day? Is it better that I stand for 2 hours and get out of the way, or do I break it into 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes whenever I get a chance? Is that better? We need to examine behavior change sustainability. One of the disappointing things that I found from both my studies is that you see a good spike at the 3-month interval, and then it comes down a little bit by the 9 or 8 month. And that's disappointing for me as an interventionist. And I want to change that. I'm going to bring that up. So we need to look at longer-term monitoring and feedback techniques using technology, more real-time kind of feedback. And we're working on those kind of things. What's the feasibility of doing this? It's occupation specific, I would say. Somebody who's engaged in, for a call center, for example, it may be useful for them because they're on the phone all the time. Somebody like a CEO, who's going back and forth in meetings all the time, you probably wouldn't want to be, sitting in a meeting with your board members and just stand up all of a sudden, it'd probably look odd, So again, feasibility matters. What's the economics of all this? How does it actually affect the dollar, which is the bottom line, I would say eventually? How much is work productivity affected? Absenteeism? There is no evidence really for all these kind of things. So how much? Because there's a cost associated with these deaths as well. But it's pretty. It makes sense anecdotally to think that the health benefits will offset the cost of the deaths over the long run in terms of insurance premiums and those kind of things. From using the desk, the overarching findings qualitatively, participants really felt good about using these things. And, the sit-to-stand desk especially, there's some people who said that there were days when they were off, for a week, and they really felt miserable not using this. This, again, is just qualitative assessment, just feedback by asking them. That could be a halo effect, I don't know. We need more evidence about how this is affecting people, concrete evidence. The issue that I face and I grapple with is that, even with a limited body of evidence, there is an increasing use at a much faster rate than evidence generation. There's a lot of people who are just adapting this without knowing whether it's good for you or bad for you, or how it should be used, because like I showed, standing there may be some detrimental effects. But a lot of companies are using this without knowing what this is. Even Mass General Hospital, for example, they have a site in Somerville, and they are installing sit-to-stand desks for their office workers. And I asked them, what's the basis for this? So it's more of the perception that people have. It's probably good for you kind of thing. So just food for thought is just have a comparison of the variables, change in variables between the two workstations. And most of the beneficial changes that I saw in both our studies was using treadmill workstations. We're actually engaging in some sort of dynamic activity and muscle contractions, not just static postural changes. So there's just something to keep in mind. So energy expenditure and physical activity, even though it's light intensity, may have a big role in actually influencing health markers rather than just static changes. So future directions for this line of work. One thing is we need a large-scale study with a robust study design. And I was lucky enough to get funded by the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health to look at this. So we are having three groups, a control group, and a group with treadmill workstations, and a group with sit-to-stand workstations. And we have various markers that we are looking at to draw comparisons between these groups, between these two groups. And this is a longer study. It's a 1-year cluster randomized trial. And the study is going to be conducted at the PRU. We're very happy to back this site. We have people from the research, management, and finance. Again, this is a cluster randomized group, so we have people working in the same area using the same workstation so that it encourages use. We have a multidisciplinary research team. I believe interdisciplinary collaborations are the way to go to maximize the findings of a study. So we have people from ergonomics and occupational safety and health, intervention, compliance and reinforcement, behavior modification, occupational medicine and biostatistics, so that we can maximize the benefits and findings of our study. Secondly, we need to examine translational markers at the molecular level. So for example, sit to stand as an intervention, it's a very, very low intensity intervention. So, it may take a while before you start to see improved changes in cardiometabolic health, because we know for a fact that there are muscular contractions and there's a slight increase in energy expenditure. So we really need to look at how oxidative metabolism is taking place at the mitochondrial level. So we did submit an R21 for this, and depressingly enough, it's right at the funding line. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed on this here. And the third way to approach this is to use technology to try and increase behavior modification and, more importantly, sustain it. And again, I'm working with a few people who were at the media lab previously, who are at Northeastern University in this field as well. And we need to look at, using this, we'll get a better idea of efficacy versus effectiveness, for example, rather than how people would behave, when they're not part of a study, per se, when we track them for a long period of time. So motivation really is something that is a key aspect of changing behavior. And there are some really interesting ways that people have come up with trying to get people to be more adherent to these kind of interventions. So this is from a website called workwhilewalking.com, and I've quoted what they say directly. So that's a workstation where you actually have to pedal to keep your devices powered, which I think is pretty motivational. You don't want your laptop dying on you if you're not being active. And this for sure will work. This, if you don't walk while you're working, it's definitely going to kill your Wi-Fi. And that's just not acceptable, is it? Thank you for your time. I'm open for questions. I think Patty has a question.
You mentioned the qualitative reaction of
Yes.
participants, and you said they were they missed not having the standing desk.
Yes.
How do they feel about the treadmill? It seems like the treadmill thing is what actually causes the positive health benefits, and I'm wondering what the qualitative response to that was.
So I did speak to my participants. There was one or two who weren't really, okay, it's fine. And one person returned it after the 3-month period, and that I would say was more because he didn't see any changes. And then he took up a more active work life. The person who lost the most weight was walking for about 5 hours per day, and he absolutely loved it. So the general consensus was they liked it, and it's just a matter of getting them to use it more. That participant, actually, the complaint that he had, who walked for 5 hours, was that he's wearing out the soles of his shoes. So he went through a few pairs of shoes. So again, the qualitative feedback there was good as well.
I'm curious whether anyone has studied the bikes, stationary bikes, because the problem with walking, of course, is that you go up and down,
Yes.
but at least with a bike, it may be more easy to use the computer.
Yep. So there is some evidence. There are, I think, a couple of studies out already. There's one investigator at Iowa, the University of Iowa who does bike things. The way I see this is, why I like treadmill workstations is because it's motorized. It's motorized, so it keeps you going. So you really don't focus on the walking per se. You talk about bouncing, that really tends to happen while you're walking at higher speeds. So if you're walking at about 2 miles per hour, it really doesn't affect you as much. So the thing with the bike is you have to be conscious of pedaling continuously. While you're walking, it's possible that you may slow down, and that doesn't work out the way I would want it to, which is why I focus on more walking rather than just biking. There are some people who use bikes, but it's probably a matter of personal preference too. And I think humans are made to walk. You are not built to walk, or built to sit. You are built to walk. That's how human beings are made.
So I have 2 questions, and I guess are related to your first study. The first one, I guess, based on anecdotal evidence.
Yep.
I find myself that I have many of my ideas when I'm moving, not a lot, but a little bit. So I wonder if you also consider creative tasks on your experiment. And the second question is whether if you look at the personality types, because I imagine like some people might like that more than other people.
Yes, possible. Yeah, those again are subtle nuances that we will need to examine, and I haven't. But creative tasks, I think, is a great idea. It may be you probably can focus these interventions on certain kind of or groups of, occupations, and yeah. Again, this is a very nascent field of investigation. It's just picking up now, so there are a lot of unanswered questions.
I have another question, actually. So we've been trying to get some more of these treadmill desks and sit-to-stand desks here at the Media Lab, and I'm curious, especially for the treadmill ones, would you recommend putting these in a more public space where people can share them, or does it make sense to have that in private offices?
I haven't done this. I know people who have done this. Generally, if it's in a public place, it doesn't really work. You need to have a dedicated workstation, ideally. So people may come and use it, and it may be just like somebody said, maybe once a day for maybe a short period of time. So, if you have a dedicated workstation, typically usage increases. And typically, if it's around people who are doing this, then there is a greater use. So, for example, when I was doing my pilot study, there was one person who said, I use this. People do make fun of me as well. What are you doing? And this was a time when this was just coming up. Nobody had even heard of this. So, this interaction, peer-to-peer interaction tends to increase use. So I know some people have tried using this in a public place and it really doesn't work and hasn't shown changes. But again, it may affect those other questions like, if you want to be creative, if you think it's better for you, maybe, it could probably benefit those kind of tasks, potentially.
You've shown some data about how it affects attention to tasks that you're performing.
Yep.
But what are your thoughts about tasks that you're doing passively, like sitting in a lecture? So should we have a lecture hall with treadmills instead of chairs?
It's actually being proposed. How does it affect? I don't know yet in a lecture hall. But in kids, they have these classrooms with sit-to-stand desks. I'm not sure about treadmill workstation, but there is some work that's being conducted that way. And again, the teachers say that the kids like it because it gives kids typically more fidgety. And if you give them an option to maybe sit and stand, it's possible that there may be a greater attention span going there. So it may benefit those outcome variables there. It's possible. Again, anecdotally, it makes sense. When you think about, it's possible, but we don't know.
Another very practical question. I mean, you mentioned that the earliest one you worked with, the treadmill, cost $4,000. Are there any somewhat, affordable solutions to buying one of these
Yes.
or making one of these treadmill desks? And what would you point us to?
So now the cost has come down to about possibly $1,000 where you can get away with this. In our study, what we're doing is we're getting the treadmill separately and getting workstations donated from a company. So, If you contact these companies, if you're trying to get a lot of people to do this, they probably can give you discounts. But if you try to get it off retail, it's going to cost about maybe $1,000 to $1,500. Yeah. And one thing to keep in mind if you ever want to do this is try to get a treadmill that has got a good motor for slow speeds, because most commercially available treadmills, they are built for faster speeds. I learned that the hard way in my pilot study because our treadmill motors were burning out. So we were getting them replaced continuously. So you need to be aware of certain things when you're doing this.
Does the treadmill have to be motorized?
Ideally, I would say, because it keeps you going. Right?
Okay.
If it's not a motorized treadmill, it comes to the same aspect of using a bike, which is not motorized. You're typing a grant proposal, you probably are walking, and then you're going to probably find yourself just stopping and just standing. But with a motorized treadmill, it's going to keep you going. It becomes second nature while you're doing it.
Okay.
Any more questions? No? Oh,
What about walking meetings and promoting those in the workplace? Is anybody looking at, how those are catching on and the benefits of that?
Benefits of that, I don't know, but it is catching on for sure. I don't think anybody is looking at how it affects different factors. Again, the research is lagging way behind in this, as in most, things that we look at. Walking meetings are becoming very, very popular indeed. I had a picture there where you had, the new buildings, they have tracks where people walk. Again, how long do these last? That's, if it lasts about an hour and people are walking for a major part of it, excellent, I would say, because that will definitely impact health. But if it's just once a week or once a month, it's, again, insufficient. But something is definitely better than nothing.
Do you have suggestions for, all-day conferences and meetings? Like we do a lot of these, where people sit and listen. I've wanted to get up and walk around several times during your talk, but there's so much kind of, that says don't do that would be rude.
Yeah.
What do you think it would take to get people to change?
I think it's got to be at a big level. For example, in this study that we're doing at MGH, we are involving the organization. And there is evidence that organizational change is very useful in impacting individual behavior as well. So we are involving the bosses, we are trying to get them to use this as well, and getting the higher authorities to do this, and actually disseminate this information during meetings, so trying to promote that behavior change. So disseminating this information at a large scale is going to help. And I think it's really good that the CDC is picking up on this and actually prioritizing the workplace for this. They have intramural studies that are looking at this change. So once it becomes, change at a policy level, I think people will get this message more, and it probably would change. But then the infrastructure has to change as well. The newer buildings are getting these, conference walking tracks. Older buildings don't have that. What do we do? The treadmill workstations we want to install, the cubicles are small, so we are finding it difficult. So you need, there are a lot of hurdles to doing this, but I think involving the employer and getting that message across from the macro level to the micro level is what's going to make a change.
So many people are wearing Fitbits and things like that. Do you have a sense of your recommended amount of stepping or walking per day? How many steps that equates to?
Yes. So typically, when you want to, the recommended quantity of steps per day is about 10,000. So that amounts to about 5 miles per day. That's a recommended version. Whereas the average American is about 5,700.
If they were to use a walking desk,
yes.
you recommend the number of hours, it would be equivalent to roughly 10,000?
If you can accumulate up to 10,000 steps, great. We saw an average of about 2,000 steps per day, which was an increase in walking. So they walked up for about a mile. And this, again, was without any recommendation or any behavior change. But again, brought our average steps to about 7,000. People weren't reaching that. And I can assure you, nobody really gets up to 10,000 steps per day, which is a recommendation. But again, it's just trying to increase as much as you can.
So I guess, if there's other ways you get to 10,000 per day, you don't necessarily, sorry, if there's other ways to get to 10,000 a day, you don't necessarily need the walking desk.
Not really, if you don't want to. But again, if you think of sedentary behavior by
Right.
itself, if there's body of evidence that just sitting alone causes bad health, independent of the exercise you do,
So
then
s-
it could be an issue.
So that was my question. So is the negative health harm of sitting, is it just sitting for long periods? So even if you walk at the end of the day,
Yep.
that may not solve for the long periods of
Yes.
sitting?
Yes. So you need to accumulate as much as you can. So the goal that I try to tell people is try to move about as much as you can during the course of the day, accumulate activity. It can be using a workstation. It can be if you're taking a break every hour and taking a 10-minute walk. So it's about breaking, that behavior.
I have a quick question. What is the incentive for employee to purchase one of those for their employees? Like, is there a financial benefit to them at all?
Yes, so that's one of the things we would need to examine, which I mentioned in one of my slides, was economics. Does it really impact productivity and decrease insurance premiums and those kind of things? If we can show that, then it's going to be an easy sell to employers. Regardless of this evidence, employers are starting to use this. Like I showed these different companies that are already using it because they think productivity increases. So that's one of the things they're focusing on. And we will get a good estimate of productivity by the end of the study that we are doing right now. So we'll see how it
in
goes.
terms of investment, there's also a space investment they have to
Yep.
look into too, right?
Yeah,
So it's
true. Yeah.
pretty costly.
Yeah. So employers are interested in that economic aspect, I would say.
Any more questions? Nope. Okay. Thank you so much for a very interesting and very useful lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.